do you think Pakistan can cope with these climate change, these challenge?
Climate change is already a reality. We know that we are suffering. The best way to handle it is to think of not of the costs of climate change, but of the benefits of climate change.
In the past, whatever commitments which were made with Pakistan that were not fulfilled.
We do need to fix our own system, make it a little bit more functional.
There have been so many Pakistanis. They all are worried about what is happening in Punjab, particularly Pakistan's second largest city, Lahore, is confronting this smog issue.
Every year in the winter, this happens. And every year there's a lot of hand-wringing over it. Lots of people start saying, oh my God, what's going on, etc. And then by February or March, it begins to decline, and then people forget about it. For the last 30 years, I've been seeing this. We've been telling the government that you should do something about it. Nothing has been done.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Hello and welcome to program Insight in V News English. Dear viewers, today we'll focus on critical issues and critical challenges to climate change in the context of ongoing COP29, which is taking place in Azerbaijani capital Baku. And this climate change is one of the most hot issue in the world. But if you look into this COP29, which is still in progress in Azerbaijan's capital, and on the sideline, there are several meetings, negotiations still underway. But at the leadership level, if you look into this particular recently held conference, most of the world leaders skipped this particularly, this COP29. There was missing of Chinese president, Indian prime minister, US president, Canadian prime minister, and several other leaders. So this has raised certain doubts that world community is not taking the climate issues seriously. And as far as United States of America is concerned, the Republicans, when they were in power in the previous term, they pulled out of the Paris Agreement, which was the biggest setback. And now Republicans are again back to power. Mr. Trump will be assuming responsibilities in January 2025. So the United States role will be critical one. And we don't think so that United States may rejoin Paris Agreement. If the United States doesn't join Paris Agreement, so which are the countries which will be taking the lead role? But ultimately, Paris Agreement, climate change commitments, declaration commitments, and loss and damage fund, that is another big issue. It is yet to be operational. These are all critical issues. To discuss this in a right perspective, we are today joined by one and only very renowned scholar, analyst, expert on sustainable development goals, and former federal minister and chairman of Higher Education Commission in Pakistan, Dr. Tariq Banuri Sahab. Dr. Tariq Banuri Sahab has long been associated with Sustainable Development Policy Institute, not only in Pakistan, but he also worked at United Nations in New York and has strong understanding and grip on issues related to climate change, because climate change is also one of the matter which is linked to the sustainable development. Very good morning, and thank you so much for joining program Insight in V News English. So I hope you have already heard my very long introduction, the type of seriousness that has been shown by the world leaders about COP29 in Baku. Your thoughts, please.
Yeah, this has not been a sort of a great start to the meeting. Of course, President Trump's re-election in the United States has raised a number of flags, because Mr. Trump has been very strongly against climate change. He pulled out of the Paris Accord. He pulled out of the Climate Convention. And the subsequent government, the Biden administration, restarted the process, but now it has been truncated again. So I think there are lots of concerns, and that may also have to do with the decision of some of the world leaders to not attend. So it might
Yes.
be that if they think that there is not likely to be a great deal of progress, then why do you waste your political capital on this? The second thing is that this is the third time in a row that the climate meetings have been held in countries which are either oil producing countries or have a strong dependence on oil. So this is Azerbaijan, previous year was UAE, previous year was Egypt. All of them have very strong links to the oil industry. And the oil industry has generally been critical or apprehensive about the climate talks. So I think for both of those reasons, there is some concern. Now, on the other hand, the agenda is, of course, very ambitious. The loss and damage fund, I mean, the idea of the loss and damage fund was that the damages will amount to trillions of dollars,
Trillions of dollars.
trillions, right, with the TR. By some estimates, above $13 trillion a year, not in one go. Whereas the fund itself is $700 million with an M. So not even a billion. And so you can see that the funding stream is quite skewed. The trillions of dollars is basically the climate cost, and
Exactly.
loss and damage fund is really not even 1/100th of 1% of what is going to be. Now, Pakistan, of course, was in the forefront of the drive to have a loss and damage fund, and I think we are very strongly committed to making it successful. But so far, the amount of money which is going to determine how successful it is, that amount of money is a little bit missing. The other issues, of course, is that when we took the global stocktake, it was found that if everybody does whatever they have committed to doing, the world will go well above the 1.5 and more than 3.5 degrees of Celsius above the pre-industrial emissions, which means that temperatures will continue to rise and the threat will continue to exacerbate. Next year, 2025, is when the sort of the fresh stock take will take place. The previous one was 2020, in which the idea is to get people to be more ambitious so that we can achieve that 1.5 degrees target. With the US now seeming to be, let's say, a big question mark over US further participation, the level of ambition is likely to be lower rather than higher. So at this moment, it looks quite dire. The third thing is that I've been getting information from a lot of my activist and civil society friends about their concerns about how Azerbaijan has been managing this process and how they've given the platform really to the oil industry to undermine climate talks rather than to build them up. Club of Rome wrote a public letter with several signatures of activists asking for a complete rehaul of the climate process. So I can say a little bit about that, but I think the negotiations process is not really going at the speed and with the level of ambition that we had hoped when it was started.
Dr. Tariq Banuri, Pakistan is one of those countries which is adversely affected by climate change. And but in the past, whatever commitments which were made with Pakistan that were not fulfilled. Although COP29 was represented by Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif, he presented Pakistan's viewpoint, Pakistan's narrative very strongly. But yet we haven't seen warm response that you have also referred to from international community towards Pakistan. So earlier there have been donors conference in Geneva. The commitments were made, but these financial commitments, grants commitment with Pakistan, were not materialized.
Yeah. Well, I think there are a number of reasons for that. One, of course, is that we do need to fix our own system, make it a little bit more functional. At this moment, when was it? About 10 years ago, 2017, the government had passed a new Climate Change Act, under which Climate Change Council was constituted and a Climate Change Authority was to be established. The council met for the first time under the interim government of Mr. Kakar. Before that, it did not meet at all, right? So we did not take it seriously. And the authority has yet to be operationalized. And one of the problems of that is that the kind of actions that can attract funds have not really been forthcoming. And I think it is very imperative for the government to operationalize the authority, establish itself, fairly as a very strong body, independent, autonomous, and with a great deal
decision-making, exactly.
A decision-making body, yes. And not a political body, but with political support. So it should be a professional body. Like we have WAPDA, we have a number of institutions which seem to be working quite well. And one of their the important things about them is that they're seen as autonomous. They're professional bodies run by professionals who know what they're doing and bring a vision for action to these things. So if the government were to be serious about this, it would be able to attract more funds. But you see, there are two problems here. One is, how does one country position itself in these circumstances? Right? And certainly Pakistan can position itself much more strongly because we are enormously affected by climate change. We have a strong case, and we can come up with projects which would help protect the lives, the livelihoods, the economy, the sustainable development progress, and also enable us to achieve our nationally defined commitments. Now, all of these things we can do, but currently we don't really have a system to be able to do it properly.
So what is the reason for that? You are highlighting this, that currently we are unable to do this. What could be the reason? Because climate change is as hot, as important as it could be fire in home. We have to extinguish that fire, true?
Yeah, but you see, that's not the important thing here is that if you have an institution which is run on professional lines, which can manage a process, which can bring...
It is yet to be established.
Yeah, so that we have actually conceptualized it, right? We conceptualized it in 2017, and we thought this is what is needed. We will establish it, but this is now 7 years later. We haven't been able to establish it. Now, in the meantime, operating it through a normal kind of a governmental process, it is not going to produce the results that we need. This is an exceptional case, and we need an exceptional institutional response. And I think our law clearly reflects this. I think we clearly understand that we need an independent and autonomous body with a powerful mandate and strong support. But we haven't been able to do it. But as I was saying, Mateen Saab, there are two issues. One is, how does a country position itself within the existing system, right? Even with small amounts of money, we need to do better. But the other one is the world going towards going in a direction in which the climate challenge will be averted? The answer is no. Right? And now with the US being a little bit on the sidelines, the answer is, in fact, even a more emphatic no, that we are really not going in this direction. Now, a lot of people are saying, well, it is time now for Europe and China and Japan and all the other countries to come together and not only to raise their ambition, but also to compensate for any backtracking that the US might do in the next few years.
Dr. Saab, if you, as you know already, the Sharm el-Sheikh conference and then Dubai conference and now COP29 in Baku, most of the speeches which have been made by several leaders, of course, the big leaders from the big countries didn't turn up. but mostly it have been rhetorics. There have been nothing new. There have been no new commitment, no new solution, and the challenge is becoming most grave. So, why there has been such attitude?
Yeah, well, I mean, the thing is that in the beginning, it does tend to be more rhetorical. And it is
Hmm.
only through a kind of a more active negotiations process that,
Hmm.
some things begin to take shape. Like if you remember the loss and damage fund, literally it was the last day when we were managed to be able to.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But it's not operational yet. Exactly.
Yeah, and I mean, and with the amount of money, even if it does become operational, it's going to be, a few drops of rain on a raging fire. I mean, that's not
Hmm.
going to be helpful. This year, the idea really was to be. This was being called the Finance Summit. How do we raise
Finance
the amount?
summit.
How do we raise
Hmm.
the amount of finances? It's not. It's not. It's not going in that direction. So it's lots of people are thinking, well, maybe 2025 is when we will do better. But the number of us, including myself, have always had concerns about this way of negotiating, right?
Hmm.
Because we have the climate change, global climate change framework is very simple. The global
True.
climate change framework is that we have a higher target, currently 1.5 degrees. That the higher target means a certain amount of concentrations of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere,
Hmm.
and that actually means to cut down emissions, right?
Hmm.
So that all the countries need to cut down emissions, so that we not only will the emissions come down and come to zero, but will even become negative over a period of time. Now, and so the entire process is, well, how do we allocate the limited amount of emission space? And on
Hmm.
that, there has been no progress because the powerful countries are the ones which have the most emissions. And the weak countries and the countries which are badly affected are the ones which have the smallest emissions. Pakistan is a
Hmm.
good example, or the small islands and so on. So the powerful countries don't want their hands to be tied. And even if the weak countries get together, they're not able to do anything. And so a number of us felt that this was not the right way to approach it.
Hmm.
We felt that the approach should have been through the energy process, right? How do you phase out petroleum and fossil fuels and replace them
Towards
with
green
renewable
energy.
energy, right? And one of the steps in that regard, when I was at the UN, we tried to push for an alternative framework in which we really focus on how to make alternative energy both competitive and affordable. Now, the competitive and affordable, it has happened, right? Solar energy now is the cheapest form of energy, right? In Pakistan,
Hmm.
people are putting solar on their rooftops of their own accord without anybody asking.
Exactly.
Why? Because
Hmm.
it's cheaper than any other alternative that you have. So it has become affordable, it has become competitive,
Hmm.
but the transition is taking much longer. And one of the reasons why it is taking much longer is that the fossil fuel interests are very strong, and
Hmm.
therefore, progress towards this transition is not taking place as fast. They can ultimately,
Yeah.
climate change really is about fossil fuel emissions. You get
Hmm.
rid of fossil fuel emissions, replace all of the current fossil energy with renewable energy, and you have
Hmm.
solved the problem. But this, all the complicated things that we are doing are simply a way of achieving this very simple objective, right? And so a
Hmm.
number of us were saying, just focus on energy, just get this transition done, lower the price, get the price down, shift the financial resources towards renewable energy. And some of that is happening on its own, but not because of the governmental action.
So, is it due to certain conflicts which are going on? Of course, Gaza war is on. United States is giving huge money to Israel, and then Ukrainian war, of course, where entire Europe and United States is giving more money to Ukraine. So, what do you think about this? That these wars and conflicts are distracting the attention on climate change action?
Not, I won't draw that conclusion with you.
Hmm.
I mean, the wars are real, and in
Hmm.
some sense, you can say that both are caused by the same problem. The
Hmm.
same problem is that there has been a gradual and a steady deterioration in global governance over the last 30 years. And
Global
because
governance.
global governance, right? They cannot, every human system, we need a governance system. We need some way in which we organize our work, in which we as individual countries and as individual feel confident that we can behave like this, and good deeds will be rewarded and bad deeds will be punished. Now, the global system is not like that, right? You have seen Israel can do whatever it wants. It will not be punished, right? And the Hamas or whatever, I mean, even if they don't do anything, they will be punished, right? So you actually have a very adverse system. And so the confidence in global governance institutions is weakened. When the confidence is weakened, nobody has an interest in reaching some kind of an agreement in which I will have to trust on you, right? So, I mean, the thing is that if I have confidence that if you and I make a decision, you will abide by it and I will abide by it, it will make the decision easier. If I don't have that confidence, I won't reach that agreement with you. So right now, there's a loss of trust among all nations, which is making these things difficult. It is also making wars more likely. The more they kind of, after the Cold War disappeared, right? Why are wars now taking place? I mean, the thing is that there is a loss of trust in global governance. And so in some sense, the root cause of both the problems is the same, but you can't say that one is distracting us from the other.
So this is very, very strategically important point that you have raised, that there is trust deficit. Countries are not hoping well as far as finances are concerned. What do you think where United Nations role stands? Because ultimately, United Nations is the global authority which maintains peace, development, sustainable development. And it was all under the auspices of United Nations that these dialogues have been taking place. United Nations Secretary General does turn up. So if the bigger countries are not responding positively, do you think it's a failure of the United Nations?
I frankly, the way I look at it, I'm a great supporter of the United Nations. I think this is the only hope that we have to create some kind of a global order in which all of us will have a stake. But the UN system is like a legislature without any executive authority. Right? It creates laws.
A legislature without an executive authority.
Without an executive. So it creates laws and basically gives them back to the countries to implement them. And so the thing is that, the ability of the United Nations to coerce is simply not there. It cannot coerce. It can shame you. It can sort of name you and shame
sanctions, you. Exactly.
And it basically relies on the countries themselves to shame each other. Right? So it creates a process in which we can find, okay, here is something that we can agree on. And then, okay, have you done what you promised, et cetera, et cetera. But it doesn't have any kind of a coercive or executive authority behind it. Now, there are two ways in which we can go. One way, of course, is that the United Nations itself not only gets strengthened, but the countries agree to play by the rules, right? Which means countries invest in a global democratic process in which we will collectively be able to make decisions. Currently, we don't see that is the case. That's why the trust deficit is taking place. The other one is to actually strengthen it in a much more different way by creating some kind of a coercive or executive authority. I personally don't subscribe to the second path, but a number of people have been asking for it. Some kind of a strengthened global system, which has
exactly that is the focal point. True.
Yeah, I am much greater a believer in democratic decision making, in which we make decisions collectively, right? And now that obviously requires a certain degree of collective action and an understanding of how that collective action has to take place, not only in the parliament, which is the UN, but also on the ground. And I feel that the countries need to start to move in that direction.
Professor, since you have been based in United States, you have been watching these whole developments. You mentioned Mr. Obama was there in Paris Agreement. But of course, United States is also one of the country which needs to fulfill its commitment, being one of the G7 countries. But why it is so? Give us some critical analysis. Why Republicans are running away from these climate change commitments?
Well, I mean, a lot of it is internal politics in the United States, right? The
Hmm.
internal politics has more or less people sort of come up with different coalitions, and the
Hmm.
Republicans have tried to appeal to, let's say, people without a college education. So that that cohort is very, they have a very high proportion of voters in among the people who do not have a college degree or do not have a
Hmm.
university degree. And in order
So
to sustain,
less sensitivity, exactly.
yeah,
Less knowledge, awareness, exactly.
so the education divide is actually very strongly
Hmm.
definitive of the Republican Democratic divide. And that, and one of the consequences of that has been a kind of an anti-science, anti-knowledge stance of the Republican Party. Right? These are all intelligent people. They know that what they're saying is not right, right? But they were against any action on COVID. They're against any action on climate change. They're against any action on biodiversity. I mean, a lot of these
Hmm.
things, they're against renewable energy. The only hope these days is that because Elon Musk is so close to Trump, people think
Hmm.
that renewable energy might get more support from the Trump administration than it has from the previous Trump administration. So let us see how that goes. Yeah.
Doctor, since you have worked very closely and you have also worked these sustainable development goals for Pakistan, how Pakistan at its own, do you think, what's your intake? Do you think Pakistan can cope with these climate change, these challenge? And if it is so, right, other than finances, there are a number of other factors you mentioned about even issues, political commitments. You think Pakistan at its own can move forward and can overcome on the climate change challenge within the country?
Issue is, first of all, that climate change is already a reality. We know that we are suffering. And
Hmm.
we were until now greatly hopeful that some kind of international support will come. Some of it will come, but not enough.
Hmm.
And the question we need to find is, how do we handle this situation from now on?
Hmm.
And the best way to handle it is to think of not of the costs of climate change, but of the
Hmm.
benefits of climate change.
True.
Right. So you ask yourself that because climate change is a reality,
True.
everybody in the world is looking for climate solutions. So we need to start producing and exporting climate solutions. I'll give you
Hmm.
one example. The classic
Please.
example of this is China in 2004. China in
Hmm.
2004 was under a lot of pressure to take action on climate change because people felt that it was not doing enough, right?
Hmm.
And what China did, instead of actually doing a kind of a normal thing, they actually started producing goods which were necessary for climate change. So in
Hmm.
2005, China was not producing any solar cells. I mean, very small. By
Hmm.
2010, it was the world's largest exporter, largest producer of
Of
solar cells.
solar products,
Of
exactly.
solar cells, so solar
Hmm.
batteries and so forth. Largest exporter of windmills, largest exporter of nuclear energy products, right? So you can see that suddenly they said, okay, the whole world needs it. We are going to supply it to them. And by supplying it to them, they lowered the prices and then they started applying it to themselves. Now, Pakistan needs to ask, in the world of climate change, what do countries
Hmm.
want? Can we deliver it? Can we produce it? Right? So, renewable energy, of course, disaster management. We have set up a disaster management system, which is quite a good system, right? If you compare it to our previous disasters, which were smaller in comparison but had very high costs. Now the disasters are much larger, but we are able to manage them, right? We are able to deliver services, etc., etc. Well, we should start exporting some of these ideas, right? If we have an early warning system, we should start exporting it. We should patent it, we should build it, brand it, and we should start exporting it. So anything like Right now, our agriculture research system is working on salt resistance and heat resistant varieties. We should
Hmm.
not do it only for ourselves, we should do it for the rest of the world, because everybody now needs heat resistant varieties, right? So the main thing is we should have a growth approach to climate change and ask how we can benefit from it. What are
Hmm.
the kind of things that the world needs, and start producing them and selling them. That is really the only solution that we have. The world is not going to help us at the level that we need.
Lastly, I would like to seek for all international audience. There have been so many Pakistanis. They all are worried about what is happening in Punjab, particularly Pakistan's second largest city, Lahore, is confronting this smog issue. Life is paralyzed, schools closed, work from home policy, things like that. What is your advice? How this could be
Yeah,
tackled?
you
Of
see,
course,
yeah,
yes,
Mateen Sahab, I mean, first of all, let me just say that smog and climate change are two different issues, right?
true.
Even though some of the causes are in common,
Exactly. Some of
they're
the causes are common.
two fundamentally different issues, right? So we should
Hmm.
not think that one is related to the other.
Hmm.
Although transport emissions and energy emissions and fossil fuel emissions
Exactly.
have the
That is a
effect,
common
but
thing.
it is
Exactly.
because of the chemicals in them, right? Because they have sulfur and nitrous oxides, etc., etc. Now, the second thing to note is that every year in the winter this happens, and every year there's a lot of hand wringing over it. Lots of people start saying, "Oh my God, what's going on," etc. And then by February or March, it begins to decline, and then people forget about it.
Hmm.
For the last 30 years, I've been seeing this. We've been telling the government that you should do something about it. Nothing has been done.
Hmm.
Now, the solutions to them are very clear. I mean, European countries went through it about 50, 60, 70 years ago, right? The London,
70 years ago.
right?
Hmm.
So in the 1950s, London was like Lahore, right?
Hmm.
You could not see anything. You could, in fact, you hold your hand in front of yourself and you could not see it. I mean, the fog was so bad. And then
Hmm.
they started regulating. They raised fuel emission standards. They raised the emission standards for cars. They improved public transport. The subway
Hmm.
system was improved. So they did a lot of things in order to, and industry was relocated outside of the metropolis, so that in areas where there is much greater wind flow, so that it doesn't affect this. So in the 50s, they addressed it. The German Blue Sky program, also in the 50s and 60s, the US Superfund program in the 60s and
Hmm.
70s, all of them actually ended up resolving many of these issues. So that is not rocket science. People know what it is. It does require a government to be decisive and to make sure that the decisions that it makes get implemented. That's all that is needed.
Last only for all big powers, developing countries, underdeveloping countries, what is the way forward from an expert and guru on these sustainable development? What is the way forward to make the world greener and to massive cut these emissions and to show seriousness?
Again, I think that this is not rocket science. Everybody understands what needs to be done. In the case of climate change, it is very simple. Get rid of fossil fuels, replace them with renewable energy. The countries which have fossil fuel, that fossil fuel is not going anywhere. It will be there for your grandchildren. At this moment, we don't need it. And at this moment, we have an alternative source of energy which is cheaper and which we haven't exhausted or used properly. Make that transition and make it happen as quickly as possible. For climate change, that solution is very clear. In the meantime, support for adaptation, support for loss and damage, those are things that need to continue to operate. I think the good thing that the Climate Council conference is doing is the global adaptation program, right? Because they're setting global goals for adaptation in order to make sure that it happens. As for the remaining sustainable development goals, the United Nations, and I was actually one of the people who started that process, we set it up in order to have some clear targets on where to go. So we have divided the entire program into these 17 different targets. This is what we need to do in energy. This is what we need to do in education, poverty,
Hmm.
etc., etc. And for all of them, we know what needs to be done. the level of commitment of the governments and the implementation of those commitments is the one part that is missing. So that's what we need. We need the political will to support the kind of actions that are needed.
Thank you so much indeed, Dr. Tariq Banuri Saab, for exclusively speaking to Program Insight in B News English on one of the most critical issue, that is climate change. And he spoke about the challenges to climate change and what the world leaders did at COP29. And the conclusion was strong political will is needed to push forward the goals of sustainable development, greener world, and of course, seriousness and commitment has to be shown by global powers. Once again, Dr. Tariq Banuri Saab, despite your very busy schedule, you spoke to Program Insight in V News English. And dear viewers, till our next program, goodbye and Allah Hafiz from studios.
Thank you. Thank you very much.